everyone, and welcome to today's episode. We're going to be talking about Uneasy Street by Becky Wade. So, this one is a contemporary romance. It fits within the Christian fiction genre, and it's also the third book in Becky Wade's Sons of Scandal series. And all of the books in that series are set in Maine. So, why did I want to read this one? Well, I loved reading the first two books in the series. Book one is Memory Lane, and book two is Rocky Road. And so off I went and pre-ordered book three, which arrived, the ebook arrived in my book funnel account, would have been in February this year. And so it's sitting in my TBR list for, it's been waiting, it's patiently waiting its time for a few months now, but I finally got around to reading it and it was definitely worth it. And the books I've mentioned, you can find my book recommendations at my blog at narelleatkins.com, and there'll be a link in the show notes. So let's talk about the book. Uneasy Street is set in a small coastal, quiet part, a very picturesque part of the world. It'd be a lovely place to visit. And there are quite a few romance tropes in this one. So it's a real genuine enemies to love romance because the main characters have some very genuine reasons to have issues with each other. It's also a second chances story, not just with the main characters, but with other side characters as well. Now, we have an alpha male hero, and he's very much a take charge kind of guy who just likes to get things done, and he likes to get things done his way, and that makes for some very interesting sparks and conflict in the story. It's a rags to riches story, so he started off poor, and he's a self-made multimillionaire. So the story does have a few billionaire-ish tropey things that you would associate with a billionaire romance where money is really no object to stopping people from being able to do things. And we have forced proximity in this one. We have a whole lot of family drama, and there's also a couple of mysteries to solve. So let's start with the first line, which is this one. I've waited 4 years for this day, and it's finally here. Now, this is Max who's talking. He's our hero. He's 32 years old and he's the CEO of a tech company that he co founded with our leading lady, Sloane. And we'll get to Sloane in a minute because, as I said, it's an enemies to love, and there are some legitimate reasons as to why they start off as enemies, and we'll soon talk about that. So, at the start of the story, Max is looking for closure. So, 4 years ago, he had been close friends for years with Sloane. They'd met at college. They'd co founded a business together. They were building it up, getting seed capital, and then everything went pear shaped and stuff happened. And she ended up ghosting him, and he's never got past it. He's always felt the loss very deeply of Sloane not being in his life. And so, being a take charge guy, he does a few things to try and get her back into his world so he can work out what happened and get his closure. So he was born into scandal. So with the three books, there are three brothers, and the other two heroes in the earlier books are his half brothers. So their father is Felix. He's a former NFL quarterback, very wealthy, very famous, and he's a notorious womanizer. And hence he's got a history of broken relationships behind him. And that's why we have a complex relationship with Max being the illegitimate child. So his mother was the housekeeper when Felix was married to his second wife, who is the mother of the other two boys in the family. And despite everything that's happened, Max actually has a close relationship with his half brothers. So, despite having a close relationship with his half brothers, who he grew up with on the main estate, he has an extremely fraught and difficult relationship with his father for a whole bunch of reasons. So, his family of origin is very complicated. And that brings us to Sloane. So, she's also 32 years old, and she was the co founder with him of this tech company, but she's now an etiquette expert, and she trains people in the art of etiquette and has an online business and does stuff in person. And she lives in California, where she moved 4 years ago after everything went south with the situation with Max and the business. So Sloane is obsessed with Princess Kate. That's the person she idolizes in a manner of speaking, in terms of being the most stylish and glamorous woman in the world. And she aspires to be like Princess Kate. And she's very particular about her style, her physical appearance, and all of that goes back to her dysfunctional childhood. So once you start to see her childhood unpacked in the story, it makes perfect sense as to why she has been drawn to Edike and what that offers to her. So anyway, she left Maine 4 years ago and lives in California. And she's back in Maine because she's caring for her 15-year-old niece, Ivy, who is a very interesting character. So Ivy needs Sloane to care for her because Ivy's adopted parents are working overseas. And this is an open adoption. So Sloane and Ivy's mother, who is the older sister, they were invited into the family. And so Ivy's adopted parents are like an aunt and uncle to Sloane, and they're all very close. And sadly, Ivy's mother has passed away. So Sloane is her only birth family connection that she really has. Sloane's father's still alive, but that's another story, which I'll get to soon. So Ivy obviously knew who her birth mother was, but she doesn't know who her birth father is. So one of the things that she's keen to do in the story is find her birth father. And I loved how that played out. There were lots of twists and turns in the plot, and it was a really satisfying conclusion to Ivy's search that I really appreciated. So anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. I haven't even got up to the meet cute yet. As I said, this book has a lot of backstory. The characters are very well developed, so there's a lot of information to work through with it as well, which I really loved. So with the meet cute, it's an absolute hilarious disaster because Max has bought this mansion on this beautiful estate. It's a very well-known established estate where they all grew up in Maine. And the adopted parents of Ivy have organised a lease for Sloane and Ivy to live in the apartment upstairs from where the garage is, and the mansion is obviously just across the way. And this is all sounds wonderful to Sloane. She's going to work remotely, care for Ivy over the summer, help her do her summer things she wants to do, get her back to school and get her in the new school year going before her adopted parents return. And that's all good and fine until she discovers that Max is the landlord and he lives in the mansion across from where her garage apartment is, which means that Sloane can no longer avoid him. And this, of course, is a massive problem. And Max has orchestrated all of this because he's determined to find out what went wrong 4 years ago. So, as you can see, there's a lot of inbuilt drama that goes along with that. And the other thing that happens at the beginning is we meet the two boys who are pet rats that Ivy has. And I must admit, I do have a very big ick factor when it comes to rodents. And I certainly would not be happy if I had to look after a teenage girl that had decided that she was a rat mum. But I will assure you, if you have an ick factor with rats, it's okay because there's nothing in the story that is going to be a problem regarding the rats. They are very well behaved, do the right thing, don't cause any drama, so it's all good. So don't let the rats stop you from reading the book. Okay, so let's get back to the story and all of the problems. And there are so many problems in this book that all goes back to the backstory. So Sloane and her sister had a really difficult upbringing. They were abandoned by their mother. Their father has a problem with gambling, and they really were neglected in many ways in terms of their upbringing and had a really hard time. And that has impacted Harper, who is the older sister that has passed away, in a different way to how it's impacted Sloane. But they've both been very damaged by what happened. And Sloane has a lot of trust issues that go from her childhood. And then, of course, Max is in the same situation. He's close to his mum. He's bought his mum a house to live in now that he has money to throw around and he's caring for her. But his relationships are very fraught. He has a good relationship with his half brother's mother, which was Felix's second wife, Fiona. And that's all awkward because Fiona and, of course, his mother don't get on. And it's just everything is just very, very complicated with what's happened in his past. And of course, his friendship with Sloane, he valued deeply. Sloane valued their friendship very deeply. And all this stuff has happened and it's gone pear-shaped. And that's really what's going on in their romance is can they get back to being friends and then can they go from friends to actually having a sustainable romantic relationship? But anyway, so we have forced proximity because Sloane can't get away from him. She can't hide from him. He's in the house, she's in the garage apartment. Ivy knows Max because Max was in her life while Ivy was growing up. So Ivy's always liked him. So Sloane is kind of stuck because Ivy wants to hang out with Max and she can't really avoid that. And then, of course, things happen that draw them together. So I loved how the forced proximity worked out in the story. And we have a couple of mysteries. So we have a missing piece of jewelry, and we also have a mystery that relates to Ivy finding her birth father and how that plays out in the story. And we have an overarching series subplot that relates to the other boys. So the heroes in book one and two, that's Jeremiah and Jude. It relates to their mother, Fiona, and things that are happening with her. So if you've read the earlier books in the series, you'll know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to say anything more about that because I don't want to spoil it. So this one has what I would call relevant faith elements that are organic to the story. And it really deeply looks at issues related to trust and redemption and forgiveness, not just with our main characters, but also with the side characters and other things that are going on as well. So, why did I love reading this one? Well, I mean, the characters Becky Wade will consistently deliver this. She will consistently deliver really well developed, real to life, relatable characters who aren't perfect. They will have a lot of problems and a lot of flaws. And at times, they may not necessarily be the most likable people because they can be a bit rough around the edges. But once you get to know them and once you get to understand why they are the way they are, then you can empathize with them and get on board with what's going on. And I just love the depth of characterization and how that worked in with the story in a way that was just seamless and beautiful. And the dysfunctional family backgrounds were so important for the story. It wasn't just an add on there for the sake of it. What had happened in the past, and also what had happened 4 years ago in Max and Sloane's relationship, really mattered for the future. And I just loved how all that emotional baggage was unpacked in the story. And the romance, it was funny at times. There was some almost laugh out loud moments of a few humorous things that happened. There was some really awkward stuff going on because when they're in the hate each other mode, that's always ripe for humor and for things to happen. And the way they reconnected, the way they really had to do the work and go back and be honest with themselves and look at the role that they played in relationships breaking down and things like that. I really appreciated the depth of digging that Becky did with those characters to really mine the emotions and what's going on and then bring all that through to a satisfying conclusion. And as I said, it has true and genuine enemies to love conflict. It's not something superficial or one dimensional that they're arguing over. It's actually real, deep, emotional, painful stuff that has happened. And I appreciated how that was able to be overcome in the story by the characters doing the work that they needed to do to become emotionally healthier people. And the quirky side characters, particularly Ivy, she is just adorable, except for the rats. As I said, the rats did cause me a few visceral ick moments. But other than the rat, she's a great teenage girl. And of course, she doesn't make perfect decisions either. And there are consequences with that. And I just loved Ivy's role in the story. It was so fun. And of course, we have some of those billionaire romance tropes that I do enjoy, where you don't have characters worried about, can I spend money on this? Is it in my budget, outside my budget? If something needs to happen, they can just organize for it to get done, travel where they need to go. And it's just a completely different experience to real life. So you get that fairy tale element that I like in a romance as well, where you're transported to a different place with different rules in terms of money not being a problem. And the double mysteries were fun in terms of what was going on with the jewelry, as well as what was happening with Ivy's search for her birth father and how that plays out. And the series subplot with Felix's ex-wives. I appreciated the twist on what happened in this book and the way it played out. And I really appreciated the emotionally satisfying tie up to the subplot. So, my favorite book quote in the story is this one. She was here to give him the things she'd once needed, because this is what she heard the Lord asking her to do. Nowhere did it say that giving to others would always be easy or rewarding. And there is so much truth in those two sentences. And the context for this is Sloane thinking about her father and her complicated relationship with him because she's been living in California and he's still in Maine. And so now she's come back to Maine. She's not that far from him and has started to spend time with him and help him. And that's really challenged her because her father on so many levels just was not there for her when she was a kid. And she really understands that even though he wasn't there for her, that doesn't absolve her of having any kind of care factor or responsibility for him, especially because there is nobody else that is around to actually assist him and help him. I appreciated how all those father daughter family dynamics were explored in the story as well, because it could have been so easy for Sloane to come back to Maine and just ignore a father and pretend he doesn't exist and decide it's too hard and decide that, he wasn't the best dad, therefore I don't owe him anything. He doesn't deserve any assistance or help from me. And I mean, in the real world, there are situations where there are people who do have those attitudes about their parents who, for whatever reason, have decided they were so hard done by or whatever that they can just walk away. And sometimes that can be a valid choice and sometimes it isn't. And it was really interesting to see all those types of issues explored in the story. So the impact on me, as I said, there were some humorous moments, so lots of smiles. And there were a few ick moments with those pet rats that that were there. They live in a cage, so that was a good thing. And there were also some really poignant moments in the story where there was some really heartbreaking, some really deep issues that were being looked at. And I really appreciate that Becky went there with the characters and she gave us a really helpful insight into what was going on with them and what were the psychological issues that were happening and how they could actually resolve those and become healthier people as well. So, with this one, I would recommend reading the series in order, not just because there's an overarching series subplot that starts in book one, runs through the second book, and then is resolved in book three, but because Memory Lane, the first book, is an amnesia trope story. So when you've got an amnesia story, you really are better off to have not read the second and third book because there are aspects of those books that will spoil the first one. So I do recommend you can read this one as a standalone. That would be absolutely fine. But if you're planning to read the series, definitely start with Memory Lane and work through in order. So, in summary, I would recommend Uneasy Street to readers who like enemies to love romances that have a lot of depth and a lot of real conflict that goes with that. To readers who like forced proximity, and if you like the alpha hero who's wealthy and generous, then you will like this one. I recommend to readers who are interested in etiquette and all the things that go with that, and learning about why that was important to Sloane. That was a fun aspect in the story. I recommend it to readers who like second chances and like having a couple of mysteries to solve as well. I love the seaside setting in Maine, so if that's something that you'd like, then you definitely want to read this one. I also appreciated the family drama and the subplot that goes with that, with the mothers, and I appreciated the relevant faith elements that were very organic to the story. And being a trilogy, I loved how it's the third book that really tied up the aspects of the story, not just with the overarching subplot, but with the family dynamics with Max and Jude and Jeremiah. And it was really fun to see the couples from the earlier books in the story as well and see what was happening with them. And there's just so much to love about this book. Thanks for joining me today. Does Uneasy Street sound like a book that you'd like to read? Have you read it? What did you think? You can let me know. If you're listening on the podcast, you can send me a text via a link in the show notes. If you're watching on YouTube, you can like the episode and leave a comment at YouTube. You can also contact me via email. You can go to my website where I have a contact form, which is at narelleatkins.com. Please subscribe to my channel or subscribe at your favorite podcasting app or subscribe at YouTube if you've enjoyed listening to this episode. And that means that you'll be notified of future episodes so you won't miss any. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please share the link with a friend who would enjoy reading Becky Wade's books or who you think would enjoy reading the Sons of Scandal series. All the books that I've mentioned, there are links in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in and see you next time.